Rain fell over Ashwood Pack the morning Elian Voss turned 22, though nobody in the great house remembered or cared. He woke before dawn in the small room behind the kitchens, a space barely large enough for a cot and a wooden chest, and he was grateful for it anyway. It was warmer than the shed he had slept in as a child. Elian had no memory of his parents beyond a few fading impressions. A woman's soft laugh, a man's hand resting on his shoulder. They had died in a border conflict when he was 6 years old, and from that day on, the Ashwood Pack had treated him less like a member and more like an obligation nobody wanted to carry. He was an Omega, the lowest rank in wolf society, and an orphan besides. In a pack built on strength and bloodline, he had neither. He spent his days in the kitchens, chopping vegetables and scrubbing pots, and his afternoons in the gardens, coaxing herbs and flowers out of stubborn soil. He was good at both. Nobody noticed. The younger wolves liked to remind him of his place whenever they passed, calling him things that used to make him cry when he was small. He had stopped crying years ago. He had learned that tears only encouraged them. "Still skulking around like a shadow," said Rurik, one of the pack's mid-ranking warriors, as Elian carried a crate of onions through the courtyard that morning. Rurik knocked the crate from his arms, sending onions rolling across the wet stones. "Pick those up, Orphan. Some of us have real work to do." Elian knelt and gathered the onions without a word. Arguing never changed anything. It only gave them more reasons to laugh. By midday, the entire pack was in motion, preparing for an event that came only once every 5 years. The Alpha Summit, a gathering of pack leaders from across the region. This year, Ashwood had been chosen to host, which meant weeks of frantic cleaning, cooking, and posturing from every wolf who hoped to catch the eye of a more powerful pack. Elian had heard the rumors like everyone else. The Alpha King himself was coming. Draven Thorn ruled the largest and strongest territory in the region, a man whose reputation preceded him by years. He was said to be relentless in battle and unreadable in council, a king who had built his territory through discipline rather than charm. He had never taken a mate, despite decades of pressure from his advisors, and the wolves of Ashwood spoke about him in hushed, excited voices, as though his mere presence might elevate their standing. Elian had no interest in kings. He had been assigned to kitchen duty for the summit, tucked safely away from the important guests, and that suited him fine. He preferred being invisible. Invisible people did not get hurt. The first evening of the summit was a blur of chaos in the kitchens. Trays needed to be carried, dishes needed to be washed, and the head cook barked orders faster than anyone could follow them. Elian moved quickly and carefully, balancing a tray of delicate pastries meant for the head table, weaving through the crowded halls toward the great dining room. He never saw Rurik's foot. The trip sent him stumbling forward, the tray flying from his hands, pastries scattering across the polished floor. Elian braced for the fall, but instead of hitting the ground, he collided with something solid and warm. Strong hands caught his shoulders, steadying him before he could crash. The room went silent. Elian looked up, already stammering an apology, and found himself staring into a pair of storm-gray eyes that seemed to look straight through him. The man before him was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, unadorned clothing that somehow commanded more respect than any amount of gold trim could have. Elian did not need an introduction to know who he had just knocked into. "I am so sorry," Elian whispered, pulling back, mortified. "I wasn't watching where—" He stopped talking because the king was no longer looking at his face. He was breathing in, slow and deliberate, his eyes going wide with something Elian did not recognize. A murmur rippled through the hall as Draven Thorn, the Alpha King, closed the distance between them and lowered himself to one knee. Gasps echoed through the dining room. Elian felt his heart stop. "Mate," Draven said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "I have searched for you for 40 years. Elian's mind went blank. Around him, the wolves of Ashwood Pack stared in open shock, the same wolves who had spent years stepping over him as though he were furniture. He saw Rurik's mouth hanging open. He saw the Pack Alpha, Corwin, rising from his seat at the head table, with an expression caught between disbelief and calculation. "There must be some mistake," Elian said, though his voice shook. "I'm an Omega. I'm nobody. I clean the kitchens." "You are my fated mate," Draven said simply, as though that settled every question in the world. "There is no mistake in that. My wolf has known it since the moment you were within 10 paces of me." The following hours passed like a dream Elian could not wake from. Alpha Corwin, who had never spoken more than a dismissive sentence to him in 16 years, suddenly appeared at his side, all warmth and false familiarity, insisting that Elian be given proper rooms, proper clothing, proper everything. The pack that had treated him like refuse for most of his life now could not stop finding reasons to smile at him. Elian understood immediately what was happening. He was not being welcomed. He was being used. A mate bond with the Alpha King meant alliance, protection, and prestige for Ashwood Pack, and every wolf who had once sneered at him now saw an opportunity dressed in his skin. He said very little that first night, allowing himself to be led to a guest room far finer than anything he had ever slept in. And when the door finally closed and he was alone, he sat on the edge of the bed and allowed himself, first once, to shake. Draven found him there the next morning, standing in the doorway with a hesitance that seemed unusual for a man of his power. "May I come in?" he asked. Elian nodded, too tired to refuse, and Draven entered but kept his distance, choosing to stand near the window rather than approach. "You do not trust this," Draven said. It was not a question. "Should I?" Elian asked, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Yesterday I was nothing to everyone in this pack. Today I am suddenly precious because you knelt in front of them. That isn't trust, that's convenience." Something shifted in Draven's expression, a flicker of understanding rather than offense. "You think I only want you because it benefits my territory. I think everyone else here only wants me because of that," Elian corrected. "I don't know what you want yet. I don't know you at all." Draven was quiet for a long moment. "Then let me give you time to know me," he said. "I will not force a bond neither of us has chosen with open eyes, but I will not pretend the pull I feel toward you is convenience either. Scent does not lie, Elian. And I have wanted a mate for a very long time, not a treaty." It was not the answer Elian expected, and it left him with nothing sharp to say in return. Over the following days, Draven kept his word in ways that slowly chipped away at Elian's guarded heart. He did not summon Elian to his side like a possession to be displayed. Instead, he sought him out in the gardens, where Elian felt most at ease, and asked him questions about the plants he tended, listening with genuine attention rather than practiced patience. He noticed things. The way Elian's shoulders tensed whenever Rurik walked past, the way he flinched at sudden movements, the way he ate quickly, as though expecting the food to be taken from him. Draven noticed, and he began to act. When he learned that Rurik had been the one to trip Elian in the hallway, and that it had not been the first such incident, he summoned the young warrior before the assembled pack, not with rage, but with a cold, controlled authority that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. "You have made a habit of cruelty towards someone weaker than yourself," Draven said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "That ends today, or you will find out precisely how weak my mate is not, when I am finished with you." Rurik apologized, stiff and humiliated, and never crossed Elian's path again. It was a small thing, in the scope of everything, but it meant more to Elian than any grand gesture could have. Someone had finally stood between him and the people who hurt him, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. There was a larger discovery still to come. Draven, uneasy about the convenient timing of Elian's parents' deaths so many years ago, ordered his own advisors to investigate the old border conflict records. What they found unsettled the entire pack. Elian's mother had not been a common pack member, as everyone had always assumed. She had been the lost heir of Larkspur territory, a smaller but respected pack that had been absorbed into larger territories after a period of internal conflict decades earlier. Her marriage to Elian's father, and her subsequent move to Ashwood, had been quietly erased from the records, likely by pack leaders who saw no benefit in acknowledging a bloodline they could not control. Elian was not simply an orphan Omega. He was the last surviving heir of a lost pack line, a truth that had been buried along with his parents. The revelation changed nothing about how Elian felt inside, not immediately. Years of being told he was worthless did not undo themselves overnight, simply because a piece of paper said otherwise. But it changed how he understood his own life. He was not unwanted because he deserved to be. He had been discarded because his existence was inconvenient to people who valued power over truth. Draven did not use the discovery to elevate Elion's status for his own benefit, as Alpha Corwin might have. Instead, he sat with Elion in the quiet of the garden and let him ask every question he needed to ask, about his mother's territory, about the pack that might have raised him differently, about a life that could have been his and never was. "I am sorry you did not have the chance to know where you came from," Draven said, "but I am not sorry that path led you here, only that it took so long." Weeks passed, and slowly, carefully, something steady grew between them. Elion found himself seeking Draven out as often as Draven sought him. He learned that the king's cold reputation was mostly armor, built over years of ruling a territory that had once been fractured and dangerous, and that beneath it was a man who listened more than he spoke, and who kept his promises without needing to be reminded of them. By the time the formal mate ceremony was arranged, Elion no longer felt like he was being swept along by forces outside his control. He had chosen this, slowly and deliberately, with open eyes. The ceremony was held in the same great hall where Draven had first knelt before him. The wolves of Ashwood Pack gathered once more, but this time, Elion did not stand among them as a servant carrying trays. He stood at the front, dressed in deep blue that Draven had chosen because it matched, he said, the color of the sky just before dawn. As Elion walked the length of the hall, he saw faces that had once looked past him, now bowing their heads as he passed. He saw Alpha Corwin's carefully composed smile, the same false warmth Elion had learned not to trust, and he felt no need to seek his approval anymore. He saw Rurik near the back, silent and subdued, and offered him a small, genuine nod. Some grudges were not worth carrying into a new life. When he reached Draven at the front of the hall, the king took his hands, and Elion felt none of the fear that had gripped him on that first rainy morning. He felt something steadier than fear. He felt, for the first time in his life, that he belonged exactly where he stood. "You are not an orphan anymore," Draven said quietly, "just for him. You are not invisible, and you are not less than anyone in this hall. You are my mate, chosen not because fate demanded it, but because I would choose you again, every day, even without the pull of the bond." Elion smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way it had not in many years. "Then let's begin," he said. Outside, the rain that had fallen on his birthday weeks before had finally cleared, and sunlight poured through the tall windows of the hall, warm and unbroken, as though the world itself had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive.